Hey, greetings. Good morning. Thanks for joining me. It's Fred in Alaska. Um, I've been behind the scenes. People have been reaching out asking about this drone thing and all that, And honestly, I don't know everything in the world, but I know enough to know when I'm being gaslighted about something. So I don't. There's too much going on to even assume anything, but it's not for our benefit. Like, I can promise you that. Uh, anyway. As far as the craziness I had spoken about, I'm waiting to get some clarification through let's call it council on what to speak about. But it involves uh, people approaching in public. We'll leave it at that. But it was very it was comical for me because it's like, hey, dude, Anyway, whatever. For another day. So, what I wanted to share with you today, uh, this comes from we'll name him Tyler, okay? And so Tyler is an elder. He's getting up on there in age, and he's an Otna native, Copper River Valley up north. And so this is something that his dad has always shared with them. As he was growing up, whenever he would be going out in the woods, his dad would always sit him down and tell him about this encounter. Now, years back, late 1800s, the Taylor Highway area, that area was like 1880, whatever it was. There was a little, a gold rush, right? And there's a lot of mines back up in that valley that cuts up back through there. And, it started off as a bunch of trails, from locals coming from Eagle, Chicken, all these places. They're, going up to do their mining. Now, the Taylor Highway proper was actually not built until the winter from 45 to 46, which, you kind of think winter building, but hey, that's what it is. And it was completed in 1951. So this is going back. So Tyler, his dad, Tyler Sr., told him ever since he was young and many times over the course of his life about this area, which I guess the closest reference we would have would be Taylor Highway at Mosquito Creek. That's a video. I forget the number, but there's a family that had saw these creatures with tails. So anyway, this is the area we're talking about. And so it was during this construction process. So it was after the winter of 46. It was later on into the spring. Now, Tyler Sr., Tyler's dad, told him that during this time, they were still doing some prospecting up in the area as the highway is being built. And understand, it's labeled a highway now, but back then it was nothing better than a cat road, cut in with the dozer. And so, don't get the impression that it was some modern kind of road. It is not the case. As any remote road up here, it is primitive, So he always told him that in the spring they were extra careful when they were going back up in there due to the bushmen, because the bushmen would wait until you were unsuspecting an attack. And so Tyler would always ask, well, what do you mean, right? Well, asked initially until it was explained to him. And forgive me if I sound a little sinusy. I've been dealing with this head cold that's just, anyway, just a miserable thing. So forgive me for getting off track there. His dad would tell him that they would wait until, the people in the area would kind of get complacent, if you will. So let's just get into what actually happened with Tyler Sr. It was spring of 1946. The runoff and the breakup was most of the way done with. And as they were going up in there, it was called Fortymile at the time. And, him and two of his cousins, they had a small claim. Everyone was still, it was producing gold. So they were up in there. And they were doing their thing. They had been there about 4 days in this particular area, and they were doing a little bit of panning, just kind of going through some tailings, that they had from the previous season, and just making sure they were accounting for every little morsel of gold they could find. And Tyler Sr. told him that it was, he remembers it clearly. They had been there 4 days, not a breath of any kind of wildlife in this particular area. And it was odd, because usually that's when animals were stirring. Bears were coming out of hibernation. They would usually at least see a handful of bears every season, regardless, moving out of the valley, heading down towards the Copper River. And so not seeing them, he just, it was odd. It was very, very odd. And he said that night, on the fourth day, as they were just finishing up dinner, they were on the riverbank, but the river was still a little swollen, but it wasn't very deep in that area, and the way it sloped up away from the river was a lot of gravel and sand, right? And then it was a little bit of a bank, and then the trees started, and then there's trees cutting back up, and then it went up to the mountain, And he said that night, just as they were finishing dinner, they started hearing noises up on that side, which would be to their east, right? If you're facing north, it was to their east. And immediately they became suspect because of the Bushmen. Now, these three people had dealt with it a few times in the past, so they were aware, but the severity of which things were going to go wasn't realized until this night. So as they were sitting there, they started talking, the Bushman's back, he's up there. They could hear him making noises, and just weird noises that they hadn't heard before, like a cooing, like a pigeon, but very loud, very powerful, whoops, short, sharp whistles, and it would go on, but it was never coming out of the tree line. It was staying within the trees, little rocks being thrown at the camp, chunks and clumps of grass, sometimes a piece of broken log would be hurled their way. Nothing large enough to really make them feel like it was trying to kill them or get them, right? And so he said they were on edge that night because something was off about that as well. It was a different tone to everything. And someone might ask, well, why would they go back if they heard it? Well, you got to understand how people are from that generation. If you don't know, look into it, because these are the kind of people that we learn from. This world's gotten real soft. I'll just leave it at that. And so they had a hard time sleeping because this noise continued through the night up until dusk or dawn the next day. And Tyler Sr. told them that when they got up the next morning, they had noticed that there was, again, gravel, sand, nothing they could get real definition of tracks from, but they could see where something had circled them a few times during the night, which really made the hair stand on their necks. They spent that day, the fifth day, kind of looking out and wondering what the hell, because it was noticed that these tracks stayed about 15 feet away from the entire camp, which was a couple wall tents set up, and the way it was laid out, it stayed approximately 15 feet away, right? And circled around multiple times. And so as they were going on with the morning and discussing, what the hell, they never had it come out of the trees. You know, it always stayed up in the trees, stayed out of view, made the noises and threw stuff. So they were concerned that it's something's going on. It's over here. So during the course of that day, there was some other miners that had come through, just stopped by. There was some people they knew. They were heading a little further north to their claim to get things started for the season. And they made mention to them, hey, you know, we had some noises going on here, rocks being thrown, you know, just, you know, you guys be aware. And look, you know, kind of showed them a little bit of, you know, the track way, the way this thing circled around. And the two guys that were heading up further north to their claim to start working it, they immediately were like, yeah, you know, we've dealt with it at our camp, you know, the past few years. And they had a little short discussion about it being aggressive. And so the other two had stated that they had two dogs a few years back that they brought with them, and this particular thing killed their dogs, right? And so they took note, you know, took it serious, and, you know, the guys continued on. Everyone's heavily armed. Understand, these guys were heavily armed for bear. They were not playing games. You know, they weren't just having some 30-30s or anything like that. They had the old school, like 45-70s or, you know, like 70-90s, just crazy powerful guns. Like, yeah, I mean, anyway, so the day continues on into the night. And, you know, at dusk, they got nothing done that day. They were constantly listening, and it wasn't until dusk that the noises started. Rocks started being thrown. But the difference was the rocks were bigger, and the rocks, there was 3 rocks thrown initially that started everything off before the noise. The rocks being thrown, the 3 rocks, each of those rocks thrown hit each one of the individuals in the leg. Okay, and it hurt. It hurt enough to crumple a grown man to the ground. And the rocks were roughly about half the size of a baseball. And these are river rocks. You got to understand, you know, when you get into those river valleys, a lot of the rocks, they're not jagged. They're smoothed over. They're rounded over from all the water and stuff. So, you know, after this happened, they were immediately inclined to start yelling up in the trees. One of the individuals, not Tyler Sr., but one of his cousins, fired a couple rounds up at a tree that was closest to the edge of the where the river line and the bank stopped. Shot a couple shots over that way, and about 20 minutes later, you know, they were all sitting there like wondering what the hell was going to happen, because they had never been directly hit by these rocks before. It was mainly harassment before that, little pebbles, little things, you know, coming near, hitting the fire, things like that. So to be directly hit, each of them in the leg, and it was between the knee and the foot, so right in the side of the calf, you know, they're getting hit by these rocks. Very accurate. They were very concerned because it had ticked up a notch. And going along with what their friends said, you know, earlier that day, that were continuing up to their claim, it was kind of an ominous feeling, like what to expect, you know, because it killed their dogs. It stalked us last night when we were sleeping. Now it's hitting us with rocks. And as they were having a discussion on what they should do, or whether they should take watch, you know, maybe 2 keep watch, 1 keep watch. They were kind of debating back and forth what would be the most optimal thing, because they didn't want to be caught off guard like they may have been the night before, right? So from what Tyler Sr. said, as they were having this discussion, they were it was dusk, but they were just getting their fire getting built up, and they had during the course of that day, since they were all on edge, they collected extra firewood in case they needed a larger fire. And so they're getting this fire larger and larger, and they hear something downstream of them, right? And it immediately startled them. They guns ready, and all of a sudden they hear, "Don't fire, don't fire." And it was a person. This particular person had a claim that they were heading to, and they got a late start. And so this person comes and joins them in camp. They knew the person. He was, you know, had a claim further on up, and he was basically running late that day, and asked him, hey, can I, camp with you guys here tonight, because it's dusk, I'm running out of daylight, and I don't want to move in these damn woods at dark. And they said, not a problem. Tyler Sr. had a wall tent basically for himself, and his two cousins shared the other one. So Tyler Sr. was like, you can, throw your gear in my tent there, and, you can bunk there. So he drops his stuff inside the tent, and he noticed everyone armed. So he, made sure he brought his rifle back out and said, hey, you guys having bear problems? And they said, no, we're not. It's a bushman. And the man immediately got concerned. And he told them, hey, I had a dog last year that was, it went missing, and I think the Bushmen took it. And so they're like, yeah, we heard, from so-and-so over there, and their dogs a couple of years ago went missing as well. And so, they're all having this talk about this stuff happening, right? And it wasn't like, nowadays, there's a lot of hushed tones, people want to whisper about it, but these guys in that element, they had to be honest with each other and tell them what was going on, and so the guy that was just came up to him, that startled him down, coming from upriver or downriver, told him that he heard from somebody that this particular bushman in that area at the time hated people because it had been shot a handful of years prior, right? And so, he told whatever that incident was, and as they were having this discussion, they hear a scream come from, it couldn't have been more than 100 yards away, but it was just inside that tree line that was off, to the east of them. And from what Tyler Sr. expressed to Junior it was very, very powerful and very menacing. It had a very a menacing tone to it, not like the stuff they had heard prior, which was just noises. So as they were standing there, they all stood up, and they're trying to focus on the direction that the sound came from. And as that's going on, all of a sudden they hear something was thrown, but it didn't. It landed like half the distance from the bank line and the gravel and sand and stuff. It landed about half distance, right? And it landed with the weird sound, like it was obviously not a rock. It sounded more like what it ended up being was a caribou head, right? The antlers had been broken off. It looked like it was the head and part of the neck, and it looked like it had been kind of wrung off of the body, and it was there. And they were just kind of, because they went over two of them went over, the two cousins, they went over, retrieved it, brought it back, and they were looking at it near the campfire, right? And the guy that had just joined them that evening, he got really, really creeped out. He goes, this is a message. This is a message. It's telling us we're going to face this kind of fate, And they're like, calm down. We have our guns. It's just a bushman, They kind of dismissed it, right? So as they're sitting there talking, sure enough, they hear crashing and just a whole bunch of chaotic noises coming from that tree line, and it sounded like it was coming at them. So they all got their guns up, and they're kind of waiting to see what happened. Now understand, at dusk in the spring and during that time, any time in Alaska, it gets dark and silhouetted in the trees, but the sky stays pretty light, so unless you've experienced it, it's kind of hard to put into context. So even though it wasn't fully dark, like pitch black, it was dark in the trees and very low light conditions, right? And so they're anticipating this thing coming out, and all of a sudden noises stop. Excuse me. Goodness. All the noises stop, and they start hearing this weird noise, and it sounded like something flying through the air. So they're kind of scattered a little bit, like anticipating another rock or a stick or something aimed for them. It wasn't. It was a hind quarter that had been stripped down to the bone of that, they assumed the same caribou, because it flung and landed, and everyone startled looking at it. And again, the guy that joined them that evening again said, it's threatening us, maybe we should leave, maybe we should leave. I want to leave, but I don't want to leave alone and end up like that, right? And again, they're like, no, it's just trying to scare us off, and basically dismissive yet again. And Tyler Sr. told the group, we need to keep an eye out, we'll keep watch, we'll do 2 keeping an eye out, and while 2 others rest, and let's do it 1 from each tent. So one of the cousins and I will start first, and then we'll let the other 2 rest, and then we'll trade out halfway through the night. So they get that squared away, and I'd have a hard time sleeping too. I wouldn't really be able to get much rest in those kind of conditions. However, Tyler Sr. and his cousin taking the first watch, the other 2 retired into the tents a little while later and whatnot. As the night went on, it was just about an hour before they were gonna change, swap out. And Tyler Sr. said he was sitting there sipping on some coffee, and they weren't looking at the fire. They kept the fire going pretty good sized, but they would keep their eyesight off away from the fire so they weren't tainting their whatever night vision they would have. And he said he kept feeling like there was a dark shadow just right over there, just outside of the trees, moving back and forth, and he couldn't shake the thought, but he wasn't hearing anything. So he thought maybe just his nerves and everything were working on him. And then something, he said, every hair on his body stood up, and he knew without knowing for sure that whatever that dark shadow was, it was the bushman over there, the hairy man, moving back and forth. And so he got his cousin's attention and was getting him, and his cousin gave the thumbs up, like, yeah, I see it too. So they start whispering, and Tyler Sr. tells his cousin, I've been noticing that for a minute now, and I didn't want to be over paranoid or what have you. His cousin said, no, it's been going on for a little while. I've noticed it, but I didn't want to say nothing either because I couldn't be sure. And as they're having this discussion, all of a sudden they hear, thump thump. It was bipedal running coming towards them. Immediately they stood up, they raised their rifles, and they both fire in the direction that this noise is coming. Hellacious scream, just loud. It shook them to their core as they're chambering another round and going to shoot again. This thing moves so fast that it basically, before they could even chamber another round, it had cleared the distance, basically ran through their fire in between the 2 tents and back across to the other side, which was the higher side of the river bank, where you go a little further and there would be the highway, right? Or the cut road. And so it went that direction. It barreled through their camp, knocked, just basically scattered their fire, into a bunch of embers and, half burning logs. And so they were startled. The other 2 people in the tent, they come rushing out, one of the tents, the cousin's tent, one of the logs had rolled up next to it and tried to catch it on fire, but luckily it wasn't able to. They got to it in time and all that kind of stuff. But so they quickly collect what they can of the embers and the fire, and they get it going again, and they build it up. And now they got all 4 of them out there, and they could hear this thing come back down, stay just out of the light, and stomp. It was literally stomping in the rocks and and the gravel, making its presence known, but staying just outside of the firelight. And just according to what Tyler Jr. said his dad would express, was that it was a dark shadow, blacker than black, that was just out of firelight. So it was hard to see if you were getting a good bead on it when you're going to take a shot, because These guys weren't fucking around. They as soon as they said dark shadow, everyone pointed their guns safely. They weren't, muzzling each other or anything like that, but they started taking shots at this thing. The first time they, lobbed a volley of shots that way, they heard it take off running after they shot. It ran back up the direction it initially came from, and it was very loud when it took off. And they said it sounded like it just kept going, like it didn't stop. It just kind of faded out in the distance. So they kind of thought maybe, okay, it retreated. It's had enough, and it's going on about its way. Well, at that point, everyone kind of calmed down a little bit, and one of the cousins retrieved the caribou leg and started getting a better look at it right near the fire. And what it was the upper part of the hindquarter leg bone was basically broken. And they were looking at it and they were noticing teeth marks on it, where this thing had been chewing the flesh off the bone and whatnot. And where it was broken, there was a broken piece of stick down in the cavity where this thing was using the stick to pull the marrow out, right? So they were kind of intrigued by that, kind of looking at it and whatnot. And as that's going on, one of them gets everyone's attention and stands up and raises his rifle in that same direction, because as they were having this discussion, very quietly, without a peep, this thing was back, and it was just barely inside the glow of the firelight, looking at them. Ugh. Fuck that. Woo. To say it startled them would be an understatement. Can you just imagine? You're sitting there, you're already freaked out. I mean, craziness is happening, and then all of a sudden, this thing is so quiet. It's right over there, just eyeballing the group, right? So they all jump up, they got their guns, and this thing just looked at him. It was squatted down. Tyler Sr. said that, he had taken the lead and said, hold your fire, wait till everyone can confirm they got a good shot. Let's shoot it. We're going to shoot it, but let's shoot it together. So as everyone's standing, they kind of moved out of the way of the firelight, so the firelight was illuminating this thing as best as it could at that point, right? And there was two on one side, two on the other of the fire, facing the direction of where this thing was squatted. And they said as they were aiming and talking about getting a beat on this thing started swaying back and forth faster and faster. So that they were kind of like, what the hell? And it stood up. And they said when it stood up, it really freaked them out, because everything else had been shadows and quick running by or whatever. They actually got to gauge how tall it was, and it was like 12 foot tall. About 4 foot wide, kind of lanky, but very, very big. And so when it stood up, they said, holy crap, and then, get your aim ready. And then they all fired. Bam, this thing just, from what he shared with Junior, this thing tumbled back, squirmed around a little bit, jumped up, ran towards him, and as it was coming again, they had rechambered at this point, and they're getting ready to fire. And just as they're getting ready to fire, it was gone. It just disappeared, right? Oof. Fuck, man. So immediately, they all fired again. I mean, it may have disappeared, but they didn't. It was just, they were ready to shoot anyway. So whether it was a reflex fire or sympathetic shooting, whatever you want to call it. And so those shots go off, that it echoes around and everything, and they're all stunned. They're looking around, they're trying to figure out what the hell's going on. Now, very low light conditions, high strangeness, and they were just like, what the hell? Everyone there was shooken. They were shaking. And at this point, Tyler Sr. would tell Tyler Jr., you never want to engage with the Bushmen. You always want to leave. If you don't leave, these things continue. And so that was a running theme of the warning. And so the rest of that night, the night was only halfway through, it would happen repeatedly. This thing would all of a sudden be right over somewhere around them. Sometimes they would hear it on the opposite side of the tent, and when they would go to investigate, they would hear it run off or move around, and it always seemed to want to show itself in a way like it was. Oh goodness gracious, sorry about that, I had it off. So it would always make itself known, almost like a threat, because what Senior would tell Junior is that every time they would notice it, it would be just at the edge of the firelight and doing the same thing. It was staring at them, and it would start swaying back and forth faster and faster. And outside of that initial it disappearing, running at them, when they would fire at it after that, it would just all of a sudden not be there anymore. Like they wouldn't necessarily see it run off, but with all the activity, they couldn't tell if it just disappeared or what had happened. And that's basically what happened for the rest of the night up until morning. And Tyler Sr. said in the morning, just before the sun was getting ready to rise, they would hear multiple long, like air raid siren type screams, yells that would start low and wind up to a super high pitched, when it ended. However, they heard the first one, and the second one was heard further up the valley. Then there was another one heard whatever direction, they couldn't tell because everything was kind of echoing, but there was no less than 4 responses to the first scream, right? And he said that everyone packed their stuff, and the guy that had stayed the night because of the time and everything, he left with them. That's the day that they actually stopped their little mining operation there. And again, it was known as 40-Mile Road. I think in 1951 it was named the Taylor Highway after someone, whoever it may have been, someone perceived to be important. But again, this area was all a bunch of trails for gold miners. You know what I mean? And there's things to be said about gold mines and hairy man encounters, because historically speaking, there's quite a few. And there's I don't know what there is to it, but it seems like something about it. Anyway, I want to thank Tyler Jr., again an elder, Atna elder, for reaching out and sharing that. And again, I want to thank the younger generation who have been bringing videos of mine to the elders and kind of encouraging them to share, because again, this is about our safety out here, man. It's crazy. And just the thought of shooting something and it disappearing, because it's not the first time I've heard that. It's not more than a couple handfuls at times. And some of those encounters are unpublished, due to people just wanting to get it off their chest. But there is definitely something beyond we can even grasp. And again, thank you, Tyler Jr. Rest in peace to Tyler Sr. That generation, man. Crazy. Thank you guys for joining me, and lots more to come. Have a good day.